You know how it usually goes. We jump straight into grammar books, try to memorize hundreds of vocabulary flashcards, and then wonder why we still aren't fluent. Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down some absolutely fascinating insights from language educator Yulia, who argues that we've been looking at language learning all wrong. What if the secret to speaking beautifully and confidently isn't actually about speaking at all? What if it's all about your ears? Today, we're going to explore exactly why listening is the absolute non-negotiable foundation of fluency and how you can strategically use it to unlock your speaking skills.
Because we've all been there, right? You study for hours, you absolutely crush your grammar quizzes, and you feel entirely ready. But the second a native speaker asks you a simple question, what happens? You completely freeze. It's incredibly frustrating. You're probably asking yourself, why can't I use these phrases? Why do I understand the general meaning but just freeze up on conversational expressions? We usually blame our speaking skills, thinking we just need more practice talking. But the truth is actually hiding a step before that. That freeze doesn't happen because your mouth doesn't know how to move. The freeze happens because your brain hasn't fully internalized the input.
And that brings us to the core thesis of today's explainer. You literally can't speak what you don't understand. Now, you'll see a lot of popular advice online telling you to skip grammar and just start speaking from day one. And sure, using what you learn immediately is great advice, but you cannot bypass the foundation. If you can truly understand what you hear, all the other skills, speaking, reading, and even writing, will naturally follow. Listening is the bridge. But as we're going to see, there is a massive difference between just hearing English and actually understanding and using it.
So the crucial point here is understanding the difference between passive and intentional listening. Passive listening is what most of us do, right? It's having a podcast playing as background noise while you're cooking, cleaning, or driving. And don't get me wrong, that's great for exposure. But if you want to make listening the bridge to fluency, you absolutely have to level up to intentional listening. This means picking short, manageable pieces of audio that you actually enjoy. It means picking material that is mostly understandable but just a little bit challenging. You need to actively ask yourself, what words do I recognize here? Can I summarize what I just heard? You start with just 1 minute of extreme focus, and then you gradually build up your time.
To really understand why this intentionality is so crucial, let's look at some staggering numbers from a TED Talk by Julian Treasure, which was highlighted in our source material. Get this, we spend roughly 60% of our communication time just listening. 60%. It is the bulk of how we interact with the entire world and with language. You'd think that because we spend so much time doing it, we'd be absolute experts at processing audio information.
But here's the absolute shocker that paints a pretty terrifying picture for language learners. 25%? According to that same talk, we actually only retain about a quarter of what we hear. That's generally true for all of us. If you're only keeping a quarter of the English input that hits your ears, well, it's no wonder you freeze when it's time to speak. Your brain is letting 75% of that vocabulary and grammar structure slip right through the cracks. This is exactly why intentional listening is a requirement, not just a suggestion. We have got to fight that massive retention drop-off.
So how do we fight it? Tip number 2 is incredibly simple but so powerful. Write it down. You can't just let the audio wash over you. You need to actively capture it. When you hear a phrase you kind of recognize but wouldn't be able to use yourself, just hit pause. Write down those words and expressions. By physically noting them down, you're pulling them out of that abstract audio stream and turning them into concrete tools you can actually use, instead of just hoping they magically stick in your brain. But you don't just write a single word down, you have to build context around it.
Let's walk through an example of how this actually looks, using some words from that TED Talk. You aren't just making a list of dictionary definitions here. For the word roughly, which means approximately, you write an example that matters to you personally, like there were roughly 80 people at the party. For a phrase like good at, anchor it to your own life. I'm good at cooking. Take the word retain, meaning to remember. Anchor it with something real. I can't retain song lyrics. And for generally, meaning usually, I generally wake up at 7. See how this works? You're breaking the words down, writing them out, and immediately making personalized examples. When you review these later, you won't just remember them, you'll actually start using them because you've already practiced putting them into real-world context.
And that brings us perfectly to tip number 3, which is where the magic really happens: weekly recaps. This is the exact formula for turning all that listening into actual speaking. First, at the end of the week, review those notes you just took. Second, don't overwhelm yourself. Just pick 3 to 5 key phrases that you really want to actively use. And finally, record a 1-minute summary out loud. Talk about what you learned, putting those specific phrases into short stories or examples. Over time, week by week, you're going to notice those phrases start coming out naturally when you speak, and complex grammar patterns will suddenly feel easy. This one habit transforms passive listening into active, fluent English.
Taking that recording idea just a step further gives us tip 4. Be your own podcast. Use the voice recorder on your phone to talk about absolutely anything. You can even send these voice messages to your friends if you want. But the critical part here is that you have to listen back to yourself. Take notes on your own speech. I know hearing your own voice can feel a little cringy at first, but it is a phenomenal way to catch your own mistakes, improve your pronunciation, dialing your intonation, and ultimately build your speaking confidence. You essentially become your own test subject.
And here is a super fun, maybe slightly silly trick to go along with that. Create fake interviews. Pretend you are a highly sought-after podcast guest. Ask yourself questions about your hobbies, your dreams, or your career, and answer them out loud. Yes, it feels a bit ridiculous talking to yourself in your kitchen, but why does this exercise work so well? Because when you start making your own sentences and hearing yourself say them out loud, your brain is forced to link understanding directly with speaking. That specific neural link is what actually helps you become fluent. You are bridging that gap between passive reception and active production.
Moving on to tip number 5, and honestly, this one is an absolute game changer for language learners. Combine listening with reading. Audiobooks are incredible because they let you pick up vocabulary and context and get used to all sorts of different accents. But when you pair that audio with a physical paper book, you create a fully multi-sensory learning experience. A lot of learners skip physical books because they think they're just like boring textbooks, but combining the two is a strategy you really cannot afford to ignore.
Here is exactly why this works like a charm. When you listen while following along with the text, your eyes see the words clearly and your ears hear exactly how they're pronounced. Your brain puts it all together instantly. It improves your spelling and you observe natural sentence structure in real time. But perhaps the biggest benefit of all, it totally prevents daydreaming. It is so much harder to lose focus when both your eyes and your ears are actively engaged in the task. It just forces that intentionality we talked about earlier.
Okay, we've got a fantastic bonus tip for you. Mix listening with movement. Don't just sit at your desk staring at a wall while you listen to English podcasts or songs. Get up, move your body, go for a walk, stretch on your living room floor, or hey, even dance. Instead of sitting still and struggling to pay attention, you are quite literally learning on the move.
And there is actual, hard science backing this up. As our source points out, physical activity actually boosts focus and memory. Moving while learning helps your brain form stronger connections. When you're physically engaged, your blood is flowing, your brain is highly oxygenated, and you are far more primed to retain that tricky vocabulary. You turn a sedentary, boring study session into a dynamic, whole-body experience that locks the language into your memory.
So we've covered a ton of ground today. Everything from intentional listening and detailed note-taking to fake interviews, reading along, and moving your body. Even if you start using just one of these strategies consistently, you're going to notice a real, tangible difference in your fluency. So my challenge to you right now is this. Which strategy will you try today? Look at your routine and pick just one to implement this afternoon. Because ultimately you have to ask yourself, are you truly listening to English, or is it just background noise on the soundtrack of your day? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.